Hello, everyone. It's George from Ireland. Well, yesterday it was announced that Marianne Faithfull is dead. She died at the age of 78. So, a 60s it girl, one of the faces of swinging London, the 1960s, when London became one of the most fashionable cities in the world, center of a lot of the global pop music scene, where the Beatles were to be found, the Rolling Stones. Marianne Faithfull, sometime girlfriend of Mick Jagger. So she's born in Hampstead. That's these days a very upper middle class area of London, about 5 miles north of the Thames, known for its Hampstead liberals. It's sort of people of gauche caviar. So she's is it half Austrian, and her great granduncle Masoch. He's the guy who invented the word masochism. Someone who Freud came to know. Anyway, so Marianne Faithfull, she grew up in a fairly upper middle class family. Her dad being intelligence officer, professor of Italian, and all the rest of it. She wasn't academic herself, and she moved around the United Kingdom quite a lot. So although they had this high academic and social status, they didn't have the finances that would usually go with that status. But she was musically gifted, and so she was a full-time singer by the age of 18. Remember, you could leave school at 15 in those days, and most people left school without any qualification in the 60s, so into folk music and so on. And I suppose she was lucky as a baby boomer because that's just when that scene was blossoming. And her first hit was As Tears Go By. So it's very of its era. It's sort of serene, pensive, soothing, that sort of song. When it was a very hopeful time. I suppose the Cuban Missile Crisis had passed. Although the Cold War was very much on, people were thinking for détente. The Vietnam conflict was hotting up. The counterculture was just getting going. It's for the real clashes of the late 1960s, the economic slowdown, and so on, major outbreaks of terrorism across the Western world. Um, yeah, so she got married when she's 19, which is not unusual at that time. And to think that she and her husband was an artist, that they were able to purchase a place in Belgravia. I mean, Belgravia, one of the most eye-wateringly expensive districts in London. So she really came to notoriety in 1967, was it, when she was arrested along with Mick Jagger for smoking cannabis, and she came out wearing some sort of like fur coat and nothing underneath it. I remember reading about this in Peter Hitchens's book, saying as a hormonal 15-year-old, it was just too exciting to read about this. The idea of this ravishingly beautiful young lady wearing something that audacious got him raging. Anyway, so Jagger was going to be prosecuted for possession of cannabis, and that's when William Rees-Mogg, father of the Honourable Rees-Mogg, he was then Honourable Jacob Rees-Mogg, he was then editor of the Times, wrote an op-ed entitled "Who Breaks a Butterfly Upon a Wheel." Methinks it's a quotation from Alexander Pope, the second most quoted writer in the world after Shakespeare, as in saying, this is a huge overreaction. Come on, let it drift. It's petty. It's a victimless crime. And as Peter Hitchens said, oh, well, this is an example of the war we never fought. We didn't really hammer these drug fiends. But yeah, so she's very much part of Swinging London. She's a friend of Keith Richards as well as Mick Jagger. She was sort of a backing singer for the Beatles in Yellow Submarine and things like that. So her first marriage broke down very quickly, and that's when she got involved with Mick Jagger. And some of it inspired some of his songs in sympathy for the devil. Okay, she also had romantic liaisons with women, things like that. So won't go through all her boyfriends. But by the 70s, she's rather washed up, like many people who find fame too young. Um, and that the paparazzi always hounding her, her face splashed across the tabloids, and people had got this bogus notion that drugs were harmless, from cannabis to harder drugs to heroin, and you think that is just the end. If you've taken it once, you've ruined your life. heroin chic, which wasn't really fashionable, because I mean, they say cannabis makes people idle around a lot and gives them the munchies, so they put on weight. But anyway, so she was painfully thin, had anorexia nervosa by the 1970s. She clearly got over it in recent years. We can see when she was a real fatty boom boom. Anyway, so she had her music career. It sputtered through the late 70s and 80s. She was actually quite popular in the Republic of Ireland, and to think that she was a squatter in the late 70s from having been such a superstar in the early in the early 60s. And you know, the population of London was actually about half of what it is now in the 1980s. And the 70s, it was very possible to just take over a flat. Okay, it wasn't connected to water or electricity. There were just lots of vacant buildings. It's staggering. Um, Anyway, she had a few brushes with the law for possessions of Class B drugs. Lived in the United States. I'm not sure how she got away with that because she had a criminal record, admittedly for like just misdemeanors, drug possession. So she carried on producing music all the way through her all the way through her life, really, and bit parts in theatre acting. So she had one child. She wrote a few books and so on, but she never quite got back to that stardom of the early 60s. I mean, although she's her life, I suppose, was quite sad. These were all these unsatisfying relationships, but she was an evil woman in her way. Marianne Faithfull, yeah, a child murderer, but somehow people are given a pass for that. Oh, that's okay. I mean, if a man has allegedly flirted with someone, they call it sexual harassment. That's he's going to be cast into the outer darkness. But if a woman has murdered her own daughter, her own son, somehow that's a-okay. That must never ever be held against her. You know, the public's going to take her side against that of her victim. I mean, it's just sickening. And obviously, fathers often just as guilty of this. So, despite what she did, and she was still adulated by many, she just got a pass on that. Yeah, she was still had sort of major performances till like almost 10 years ago, Marianne Faithfull. So I don't know what was the cause of death in the end. So I suppose those surviving rock stars from the 60s will be there lauding her. She married, was it 4 times? Yeah, but none of her marriages lasted terribly long, none of them more than 7 years. Okay, so that is Marianne Faithfull. I'm not sure the cause of death. Well, I mean, I know her music gave pleasure to some, but, you know, she will not be missed. Goodbye.